Framework is used with the Flutter. It's a simple way to have your state managed by any component or any widgets, let's say. So if you are a total beginner here, you can easily go to the riverpod.dev and then try to get to the documentation. The simple example is that it has a lot of what they call the provider, and they use this function when you can pass an argument and then have your state changed here. Documentation is really rounded up, and it's really the guidance here, it has a lot of information. So the API reference, which is where we can get all, is that you have like provider, state, notifier, provider, future, stream, and state, and change notifier provider. So I think this will be in the description below. Take a look at it, and if you still don't have the basic and you need more, I think YouTube has a lot of basic, or let's say introduction about Riverpod in such a case. Our example here, or our tutorial, will be more that you already know what is the Riverpod, so it will be a bit of medium or advanced tutorial. I'm going to use the same older project we used for the authentication. There are a couple adjustments that we have done here. Is that, for example, we are adding the correct ID, and then we are sending the status code now every time we do a request to the login method. The register will not be touched, as we are not using this in our app for right now. So this you need to go through this project first. I will put this in the description below, where you can see how we are dealing with the REST authentication call. New Flutter project, we add a couple dependencies. One is called hooks Riverpod, and then HTTP share preferences and Flutter hooks. So Flutter hooks is used to handle the form. Hooks Riverpod is actually another package from Riverpod itself. Instead, if you want to use only hooks and not use the main package Riverpod itself, HTTP to make HTTP calls to call the endpoints, and then share preferences is to have the storage user data in the storage file. When our app will start, is first we try to bring the void main method. So here what we try to do is run the app. I deleted everything, we start from scratch, so we put the run app, but here first we will try to put a provider scope. Provider scope is coming from Flutter Riverpod, or the hooks Riverpod, and where we try to wrap our app here. Our app will be simply extends from the hooks consumer widgets, where we have the second argument will be passed to the build method. This reference will be used mostly to get most of the any provider that we will define. So for example, here we put the return material app as normal, then we define our home, we get the reference, and then we try to say watch. So this is the first method we will use mostly, is that the watch. We're actually trying to watch it as it implicates, so it will try to watch the changes for this provider to get the information. So now this provider will get to it soon. After it, we try to put .when. So there are two .when, and there are a couple methods it can be used on top of the watch. And one of them is when, where it has three methods try to render. The first one is the data, will be passed the data, depends on this. For example, if you check this provider, it will return future provider Boolean value, and then it will pass the Boolean value itself, and then here we determine if this authenticated, because this will be returned. Then we go to the home screen, otherwise the login screen. And then case of the loading, we always to have the indicator, loading indicator. And in case of error, we don't have any handling error right now. It's just the sake of the this tutorial. So you can have the handling error, but we always go to the login screen. And now we need to define our routes, which will be mostly the home and the login screen. File called storage state.dart, where actually I have all the providers that I can define here regarding the storage that can handle. So the first one, maybe I will try to create a key, where I called is authenticated key. This will be the key for the storage, and then I will have the shared preference provider. Sorry. So here we will have a simple, or let's say, or static provider, where we actually using the one of the providers that the Riverpod is providing, let's say, and then that's actually the provider. So this is the basic one, and we will return only the share preferences get instance. I think this is not necessary, but I try to put this one is here, will be more easier, I guess. Then we will create another one which will what we call the set authentication or auth state provider, and this is have the ability only to change the state of the element that will be returned. In such a case, we are returning either the authentication response, which is actually just a class to have couple elements, as you can see, authentication values or the integer status code. This is actually will come in handy later on, and I will go through it also. So it will be either null value or it will be the authentication response. And then I will try to get our authentication provider here. So here where we actually return is the user is authenticated by getting the value from the storage. So as you can see, it's a future provider, return a boolean. And as a future provider, it's always have, it's better to have a sync value, and then we will try to get preferences, so we will watch actually the set authenticated. First of all, we will watch the shared preference in the top, and then we also try to watch also set authenticated provider or auth state provider. Why? Because we need this to be run every time this will be changed. So in such a case, the main or in the Dart main file, when we have the when we listen to this, it will be also watched because we are setting a new value. So in the end, we try to return whatever gets from the preferences as a Boolean value with this authentication key, and then we will also return false in case of this null value, because we have a nullable assign here. Now when it comes to the set authentication authenticated provider, because until now we only get what we have in the authentication, so it's only getting what we really have. So in such a case, we need to set it the value, and in such a case we also listen to the authenticated state and try to see if this is not new. Actually, then we pause this authenticated, or actually we can pause it. This is mainly to make sure that this will be run again and again whenever changes happens to this set state, but it doesn't mean that we are taking the value and we pass it here, because the value could be null. So in such a case, we are trying to make our set authenticated provider as a state with a family to provide a Boolean value, and that Boolean value will be passed to here to set it. So I try to actually not to get it from here, because this will be a lot of let's say redirection, but I thought it will be easier to get this here. We have, as you can see, there is also nothing fancy here. We're trying to make a class that extends the hook's consumer widgets, where we need to pass the widget reference, the same as in the main. Here we have a scaffold, we have a text where we have like the home screen, and then inside that text, or maybe next to the text, where we try to build actually getting the authenticated user, and then we try to build it. So in such a case, we use the same method that we use in the main Dart, where to try actually to get the reference, watch whatever the authenticated user provider. Here is different than what we have in the main Dart. This is actually the user the user object that coming from the storage. And then we have also the when method. So we have the circular indicator data. It will comes with the email because we are actually not taking the whole user data. I called it the user data, yes, but it's actually only the email. But this is to be extended by your case if you want to have, depends on your requirement. So such a case, I would actually call this get authenticated email user provider. Then it will take the email and then try to build whatever the email will be, and then this actually email will come from the endpoint. So it's not up to the email that we are sent, it's the email that's coming from the response. And then we here in such a case we have the user information. Well, you can put anything you want in here as error, or you can do anything redirection, it's up to you. Now we have a floating action button, and this is meant to be actually to delete user. Why? Because it's simply or maybe if you want to log out, so we can call it this a logout, you can call it a delete user, you can call it anything, but for my case, especially when I start testing, it's really helpful to have a button where I can actually flush the data in the storage. So here we have on pressed, where I can actually read. Here actually I'm using another different method where actually using the read, and the read should not be also used in the top of the build functions here or methods. It's one of the misused for this. So you should not use the read in top of the build method. You should only use it inside an event listener, and you can handle this, otherwise you will have a lot of errors. Now we have another provider called reset storage. I will get back to it. And then this will return also a boolean value, or actually here a dynamic. But whenever this value is there, then we are going to the login screen. So here in total, let's say home screen has two providers, and these providers needs to be handled. So one of them is get authenticated user provider. In such a case, we are doing the same. So we have a future provider with the string value will be returned, getting the reference of the shared preference as always because it's related to the storage. And then we watch whatever will be set to authenticated user. And if we remember that this one, it will be no. And so whenever this will be set, this get authenticated user will be also be watched to see what's going on. And then in such a case, we try to get by string value an email key, otherwise it will be empty. So this is a key that we already defined here. Now another provider that we used also on the home screen is called reset storage. I should call it actually with provider, reset storage provider. Anyway, so this is actually just a state provider. Why? Because there is actually the value is returned, yes, but we are not doing any handling regarding the widget manipulation. We are only checking if the value is returned as true. So this is actually will return a boolean value to say is it complete the flush the data or not, and then we are only doing the redirection inside the home screen. So we watch the shared preferences first, and we will wait, and then we take the preference to clear the flush data. Actually, you have a lot of functions here. You can also clear only that key, actually, or you can check all the keys. So it's a lot of information here. But for me, when the user is logged out or deleted, I need to delete everything related to that user inside the storage. So we get the value and then we handle it as I said here. When we try to check if this value, then we go to login screen. Now in the login screen we will have, well, it's the same. So we will use the hook consumer widget. We provided the reference to us, and then we will use the Flutter hooks here. So because we have two text edit fields, we will use text editing controller. Here we have only two fields: email controller, password controller. And then the rest is only scaffold, where we have all the fields to be handled, the helper text to be email, just to indicate that there is an email, and also for the text field for the password, and don't forget obscure text to be true. And then so here we'll come to the magic. So here what we try to do first is that inside the text button where we try to log in, we first check if the email controller text is not empty, the password controller also text is not empty. So this is simple validation, let's say. It's up to you how to define your validation. And there is also a validation in our endpoint. So we try to put a couple validation regarding the text length for the characters, but there is not actually validation regarding its email or not. So that's why you see me that I'm doing code review without anything. So this is a point for me to improve the endpoint there. Now we have as I said, a model where we try to put the email and password here. This is called just a model to have the email and password instead of to will be a mapping object. And then we will try to reference read authentication or auth login provider with these arguments. So this is a provider is the main heart of this tutorial, let's say, when we have the authentication login provider. Now after that we try to get the authenticated user by getting the is authenticated provider. Why is that? Because we need this value to have also to have the redirection. So here we don't read it actually from it auth login provider, because this will be a future provider, and then it will be also coming as an async value or something like this. So this always will be an async value, so I try to not to do that. So I get the value from is authenticated provider, the same in the main Dart file, and then we read that value from there. And if the value is already there, then we try to navigate to home. Why is that? So for example, the first initial boot up of the app, it will not be needed to this. But the problem is when you try to flush the data from the home screen and then it will push again the login screen, it will not recognize that this authentication provider. So this will not be recognized. And in such a case, that's why I try to do it also here, that to make sure that the value of the storage is already set again, and then we try to push to the home to go to the home screen. Another thing that we will do normally in the login screen is the handling error. And in such a case, we will have the reference to listen. Another provider we will create or we will go through is that authentication error message provider. So this is, as you can see, it's a state provider, will be passed as a message. So it will be passed any message to it, or actually it will return a message. And then we try to listen to that one. Whenever this one is changed, so here we use listen, the documentation of Riverpod is already advised to not to use read, so I will say like here, to not to use read inside the build, directly inside the build method. So always use it inside, always use it inside event handler. And then it was always advised to use listen or watch. So I didn't put a watch here, I need a listen because I need it is continuously listening to this provider. So listen actually will not rebuild the widgets. Watch will rebuild the widgets. So here in such a case we try to listen to it. And then it will have the two parameters as a callback on that inside listen. And we will check if the next is not empty because it is string. So if it's not empty, then we try to handle this error by showing a scaffold here. And then otherwise it will, we already know that the authentication is successful and we went to the home screen, so we try to empty the email controller and text controller, and actually you can have the idea to keep them, for example, only for email controller, and then the password will be removed here. So yes, so the login screen is using around 3 providers, one for the error message provider, one for the login, and one for the authenticated provider. This were already discussed, then we will have these go through this to explain it. For the auth error message provider, what we try to do is actually, it's a state provider, as I said, where we have the string, and that string actually, whatever you send, whatever it will be set, it will be return this value. When it will be set inside the auth login provider. So this is our second provider. I need to go through all of this from the scratch. So first of all, we create authenticated class arguments to handle the parameters that will be sent, as we discussed. Then we have authentication values. So that's an extra class where maybe you want to save the token, the refresh token, email, and client ID. And this is actually the response coming from the endpoint. And in such a case, because it's coming from the endpoint, we need to stringify it and we need to parse it from the string JSON. So we create a class from JSON and we create a constructor from JSON in such a case. Now, auth response actually will have both. We'll have the auth values class and we will have also the integer status code. Why? Because we need to handle the status code apart from the auth values itself. And then we will create another class. It's called authentication handler. So in this class, we will have the auth values to be passed, which is actually email, client ID, refresh token. We create them, we assign them to empty string in the beginning to make sure that our app will not throw an error in the beginning. And then we will have the login. The login is a future which type of authentication response, as I discussed, and this will be either it will be two values, which is integer, the status code, and also the auth values. And we pass the argument type of auth args, and then we try to go to the local host. This is actually where your endpoint comes in the picture. My endpoint is using the local, so it will be calling the local host API login, and we pass the arguments for here: email, password, and my token. This is required inside our endpoint. So, and then we try to parse the auth values. So we get the auth values, passing whatever the response body coming from our endpoint, and then we return auth response as values and status code. Why we return the status code as a part? Because we need to handle this. It will be depending on is it the user is authenticated or not. Then we create an authentication handler provider. This is actually only return the class itself. Why we need that? Because it will be separate, so we will use this as a separate. So for example, let's say that you have a register method here, so you can define your register method, and then you can use this to get the register method. And then we will come to the login provider. So the login provider is a future. It has the auth arguments and it will return Boolean. And then the first thing I will do is actually to delete it. Why? Because inside the local host, it's actually taking, it's actually really fast, and that's why I try to a bit slow it down to make sure that what's happening in the picture. But in the real project, I wouldn't advise to do that. Now, what we try to do is actually getting, we will watch authentication handler provider. So we will watch actually the class itself, and then we ask to do the login method here, and we pass our auth arguments that's coming from the input fields. Then, since this will return auth response, so it has a status code in it, and then whatever the status code will be, so this is only a condition to make sure that because it will be used multiple times. So I was thinking like, okay, let's go, if this one is 200, then we go to our conditions. So in case of this is true, then I will go to set authentication provider notifier state to auth response, and which is actually telling, so if you go to this will return a null, and here we will set it to a value of auth response, which is actually auth values plus the integer status code. And then I will also set is authenticated to is authenticated, because I know it was watched by other provider by this, but it wasn't handled properly, so it's actually doesn't seems to listen to the authentication, so I really put this one here. And then also I put the authenticated user, or what we thought to call it is authenticated email user provider, and whatever will be the auth response email coming here. Otherwise, if we are all the cases, so if the status code is not 200, then we already put the auth error message provider, and this is up to you to put whatever want to be. So here, for example, I can easy by, for example, don't send the token. Let's say here. So for example, I don't need to send the token here, and then this will return, in such a case, it will return 406 in case of 200, and then you can see that this will be passed to the status code here, and then it will be here, and then it will be our message that coming as a snake par. To recap, we have the as I said, using the Riverpod, it's really easy to have all the state managed. Do this, and let's see, code review, and then it will read anything here, login, and then it will redirect it to the home screen as I said, and then code review. For example, here you can see that there is a code review for, and if I click delete, it will be actually pop and then go to another screen. So you can actually just push named, as I said. Here I will just show you. Here what we are using is actually pop and push named. What you can do is only push named also to not to see that I mean the black screen that's showing in the navigator. Now I will try to log in with another user. Let's say user name, and then whatever password will be, and then we try to log in. You see it's coming, and then it's changing the username. So there are two, let's say for you as a challenge, is what you need to do maybe is first of all is try to put a registration to handle the registrations the same as what we did in the login, and then also maybe is that put an account switcher where you have couple accounts that you're trying to log in with, and then you try to save this users also in the storage and try to correct to get the correct one when you boot up the app. So I think that's it for our tutorial. I would really appreciate if you have any feedback, put it in the description below. Everything that you need to start also in the description, and if you want to have any tutorials or something like this, and just put it in the also in the comments. I'll try to look at it, and I really apologize about not uploading videos recently because I had personal issues, so I apologize for that. And yeah, thank you for watching, and Merry Christmas.